So, the draft is in the books, and as we've said a lot over the recent years, it was a home run for Georgia. 13 players drafted out of 17 total. So, once again, 17 total guys even eligible for the draft this year. 13. I think in my predictions last week, I think I predicted 14. So, one off, but still overall another banner night for Georgia at the NFL draft.
I thought it was great for Georgia. You know, been saying for months now, going back to the Super Bowl, that, you know, this is your recruiting pitch. This is your recruiting poster. And Georgia just had the second best draft night of Kirby's tenure, which was really the second best draft night of all time because they did set the record, and they were two off maybe from the record. I think it was 15.
The record's 15. The record was 15 that they set in 2022. Ohio State had 14 this year, so there was some people thinking that maybe Ohio State was going to break the record this year, but they ended up at 14. So
yeah, but
Georgia's record's safe at least for now. It's really just a crazy last 4 years in the draft for Georgia. They've now had 46 players drafted since that first national championship team. And that doesn't include some guys that, went other places and ended up getting drafted, like A.D. Mitchell and Jermaine Burton. So 46 players in 4 years.
It's a great time to be a Bulldog. That's for sure. So this is what Bama's felt like.
Right.
For years. We're on par with that in terms of the talent and the players going into the pros. This is not something that we've seen at Georgia in our lifetimes. We've always had like one or two guys that are like amazing. You know, you got your Matthew Staffords, your AJ Greens, but the breadth of talent that Georgia is putting out in the NFL right now is just insane.
And the thing is, everybody thinks about the defense, right? But it's not just the defense. So I actually looked at it. If you use just players from the last 4 seasons, Georgia could field an entire NFL roster with starters and backups at every position. There are some exceptions, quarterback, because Stetson Bennett's been the only one drafted in that time. But if Carson Beck would not have decided to, transfer and would have stayed in the draft originally, you could have checked that one off. And then punter, we have had a punter drafted, which is Jake Camarda.
He could have, Carson could have gone in the 5th round with Shedeur.
Right. Or he could have gone in the 7th with Quinn Ewers.
That's right.
And then, of course, the position that we haven't had anybody drafted in is kicker. Hot Rod was before this group, and he wasn't even drafted. So, but other than that, Georgia really could field 2 deep at every single position just from guys over the last 4 years.
That's awesome. And for this year, it's kind of interesting that, we have 2 receivers drafted, 3 offensive linemen, and it's just mind-numbing to look back on last season and to think that Georgia couldn't run the ball with 3 NFL linemen.
And not only that, 3 NFL linemen drafted in the first 3 rounds.
They're all going to be playing.
A running back who was, and the 4th round running back. So, it's a little bit questionable, both just in the talent as a whole, is why wasn't this team better? Why didn't they gel better like they did really in 2023? I don't know. The talent was certainly there.
Maybe it was just a lack of leadership at the most important position.
It absolutely could. So another thing I saw that Rusty Mansell put out was that there are still 4 players left from the 2021 national championship team playing in college football. That's Carson Beck, Micah Morris, who's the only one still at Georgia, Jonathan Jefferson, and Austin Blasky. Now, Georgia currently sits at 45 players from the 2021 team drafted. That's not just drafted out of Georgia. That includes guys like A.D. Mitchell and Jermaine Burton. The record for number of players off one team to ultimately get drafted was 2017 Alabama. They had 47. So if out of those 4 guys, if 2 of them manage to get drafted next year, then Georgia can tie the all-time record for number of players drafted off a single team.
That is insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely crazy.
I mean, just what a loaded roster. I mean, we didn't know how good we had it. And I think at the time, being jaded Georgia fans, we were just like, the shoe's going to drop any moment now. You know, we're going to have that slip up that we always have, but it never happened. Well, you had Alabama, but we recovered nicely.
And I think we're obviously entering this new era, this NIL era, and until it gets under control, I don't think you're going to see those type of numbers again out of one team, because guys are going to move around. If they're not happy and somebody else offers them more money, they're not going to stay. Or guys, you know, Carson Beck's a perfect example. A guy who would have been drafted is now returning to school, and ultimately it looks like a much better decision when you saw how the draft ended up going. But I just don't think you're going to see that many guys off a single team drafted in those years. This might be the end of it. I mean, even a team like Ole Miss that lived and died by the transfers, I think they have 8, 9 in this draft. They had 8. So, you know, that was a team that really was that mercenary team taking lots of people. And yes, Ohio State had 14 guys drafted. A lot of those were transfers, if you think about it. An amazing accomplishment, I think, for Georgia over the last 4 years. You can't really ask for any better in terms of recruiting and development. The pitch is there. If you want to come and you want to get, you know, developed, come to Georgia. If you're worried about your money and that's what you're here for and you want to make your money now, maybe Georgia's not the place for you. But I think, you know, the numbers are there.
Yeah. And I think just looking at this year in what Georgia's doing on the recruiting trail, I think the proof is there for players, and especially with all the access that you now get with the NFL personnel. You know, there's been a ton of interviews over the past few months where people have talked about the Georgia program and their practices, and if you get a player out of Georgia that they're going to be ready and prepared for the NFL. That's a great sales pitch. You couldn't go to a better place to get prepared for your next job.
There was another one this weekend. Oh, one of the NFL GMs. I can't remember who it was.
Yeah, it was talking about Detroit.
Yeah, he was talking about visiting Georgia, and he was like, that was something different. You know, that those guys come in, and obviously Detroit, you know, they drafted a couple of Georgia players, signed a couple of guys as free agents. So they were obviously impressed. And you know, another thing in watching this draft, and when we talk about the individual players that you're starting to see, is as Georgia has these large numbers, you're starting to see multiple players on single teams, right? We've been talking about the Eagles for a few years now. And obviously they added somebody else, but now you're starting to see teams like the Packers have multiple guys. The Vikings have multiple guys. The Ravens have multiple guys. So it's not just the Philly Dogs anymore. You're starting to see more of that across the league.
Yeah, I think the Packers really started that trend. When you think about it, because that one draft I just know this because of the montage on Pat McAfee. Yeah. The guy just so mad that they didn't draft a receiver and just kept drafting Georgia defensive guys. It was like Quay Walker, Eric Stokes,
right?
And it's like, wow, those guys are really good,
right? Well, you know, and if anything, Georgia can proudly say that we had enough good guys, and we had one at the top this year, that we finally forced the Atlanta Falcons to draft a Georgia player in the first round. First time in Atlanta Falcons history, they drafted a Georgia player. And it may be the first time, I think, since the 60s that they've even drafted a second or a first-round player. And I think the last guy before Jalen Walker was selected there at 15, the highest guy before that was Scott Warner. In 1981. Yeah, and that way he was in the third round. So the Falcons have always avoided taking Georgia players, whatever reason, whether it's on purpose or not. It became a stigma here in the city. And I know I talked to so many people the other night who were worried when Jalen Walker was falling. You had to make that pick. And I'm glad they did, because I really didn't know they were going to.
What a value pick that they got, too, because everybody had him as the first defensive linebacker edge guy to come off the board. No one pictured Mykal Williams going first.
Yeah. So
especially when you look at these two guys, they're on the same team. One won the Buckus Award, but they are two different types of players.
yeah.
But man, what a steal at 15, because he was supposed to go top 5.
Right. And, everybody talked about in this leading up to the draft, Adam Schefter was talking about today, the Falcons were in love with James Pierce. He thought they were going to take him at 15.
Obviously.
Like, he thought they were going to take him at 15, and it was almost too much of a value that Jalen Walker was there. Like, if Jalen Walker wouldn't have been there, the Falcons might have taken Pierce at 15.
If the Falcons would have taken Pierce at 15, there would have been a riot in Atlanta.
Right. But getting him at 25 is really a value. He was one of the better players in the SEC, at least at rushing the passer last year. So you pair two of those guys up.
But is he worth giving up? First round next year, second round, however many they gave up, it was a lot.
Yeah, it's a question, right? But if they valued him that much, and those coaches know that the problem last year was the pass rush, right? Address it. They certainly are going head on. Like
that has been the problem for the past decade.
It has, but a lot of times it wasn't addressing what you need. Like the last few years when the Falcons take offensive players when they needed defense every year.
I know that's my point.
Yeah.
This has been the problem for the past decade, but they just, hey, let's draft another wide receiver. Let's draft another tight end.
Yeah. And
let's move up and draft a running back when we already have a 1,000-yard rusher.
Right. I did like what the Falcons did in the third round, though. They got Xavier Watts from Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And so,
that was huge.
Jalen Walker won the Butkus last year, top linebacker in the country. Well, Xavier Watts 2 years ago won the Nagurski Award as the best overall defensive player in the country. So you've got two awesome award winners over the last couple of years coming in, and you have James Pierce, who was regarded as one of the best pure pass rushers in the SEC. So really addressing the defense. The Falcons only took one offensive player. It was way late in the draft, an offensive tackle. So they addressed their needs. It was impressive.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Watt led the nation in picks last year.
He may have either last year or the year before.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the funniest moments of the whole thing was that obviously the Falcons and the Saints always poking at each other.
Yes.
The Saints with their first round pick took Banks, the left tackle from Texas. And if you remember what happened when Jalen Walker faced Banks, he had 5 sacks against Texas in those 2 games. So the Falcons were running highlights of Jalen Walker against Banks on their Twitter account. It's pretty funny.
We got a great preview of that this year of what it's going to look like playing twice a year.
Right. And then they also kind of trolled. They used Xavier Watts as another troll because the quarterback that the Saints ended up taking, they had a video of him getting intercepted by Xavier Watts. So it was good.
Oh,
it was
man.
good, clean fun by the old Falcons social media team.
Some of the clips of Tyler So were hilarious. They're like, "This is the guy you're drafted." It's like him just flubbing the balls down the field.
Well, there's that one from the combine, right, where he makes like the worst pass.
Oh yeah, that history. One too. It's like, that was great.
Yeah. So outside of the first round, or outside of Jalen Walker, really, let's kind of go through and look at all the remaining Georgia picks and kind of talk about where we predicted they were going to go and where it went.
Sure. Before we do that, if you like this content, hit that subscribe button and hit that like on this video. It really helps us get the word out about the show, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear from you as well. Leave a comment. Let us know who you think is going to go next year in the draft. So, Absolutely. So getting back into the first round. So, obviously, the first guy to go off the board was Michael Williams. He went number 11 overall to the 49ers. Everybody thought he was going to go in the first round. I did as well. He did. There was some serious criticism of him, though, by a couple of outlets. They listed him as a project and all these things. And I understand Michael Williams was injured a lot at Georgia. He was a guy who 5-star pedigree, had some flashes, but when he was healthy, man, he could play. Like last year, he played all year hurt, and even in a couple of his games, the Texas game early in the season, the skills were there. So I think he's going to be a hell of a player.
if he can stay healthy, that's the big question. I think that's where it's earned criticism. You got to stay on the field to be good. You can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't step foot on the field, then talent means nothing. And even last year, I mean, fact that he did play hurt all last year, that's got to be a caution flag at least, But
he did get hurt on a dirty play though. He got hurt in the Clemson game on a very, very dirty play where a guy dove at his ankle. It wasn't like a freak injury. It was because it was a dirty play. So, but yeah, I mean, totally warranted, right? The question there,
But it's going to happen. But if he can stay on the field, I mean, that with him on one side and Bosa on the other, I mean, that's a hell of a tandem right there.
Right. The other first round pick was Malachi Starks. He went number 27 overall to the Ravens. I felt he wasn't going to fall out of the first round because I felt that if he got to the Eagles, they were going to take him.
Oh, they would have in heartbeat.
Yeah, but he went to the Ravens. He'll get to play, behind Roquan Smith. Obviously, they didn't play together at Georgia, but man, you've got one of the best linebackers in the country, and now you have one of the most athletic safeties day one in the NFL because look at the plays he made.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like Ray Lewis and Ed Reed.
You can picture Malachi Starks.
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. He's Ed Reed and Roquan Smith is your Ray Lewis.
Yeah. So that's a good landing spot, and that's another one of those places like I talked about where you're going to have two Georgia guys out there on different levels of the defense. In the second round there, Tate Ratledge went to the Lions at number 57 overall. That was a little bit higher. I thought Tate was a good candidate, late second, early third. He is a guy that also has dealt with some injuries throughout his time. Obviously, he missed everything but that Clemson game in 2021, was hurt up and down a little bit this year and didn't have as good of a year as he had the year before, but leadership and just a mammoth guy. I think that's a good spot for him, headed to the Lions coming off that great season they had last year.
Yeah, I think this is a great pick for Detroit. And, I'll give Tate the same criticism that I gave Michael. He's got injury concerns, but when he's on the field, he's got the talent. And I love that he went to Detroit because I love Detroit's coach, Dan Campbell. I mean, I don't think there's anybody that doesn't like Dan Campbell, except for maybe the Packers and Bears fans.
Yeah, you feel like Dan Campbell is the type of guy that can appreciate Tate Ratledge's mullet.
Absolutely. Like, have you seen those videos of Tate running the 40 and they're playing Freeburg? And he's running slow motion.
No, but he ran an incredibly fast 40 at the
I know, but it's great because he got the mullet just flowing in the air, and you got Freebird. It's great.
Yep. So up next in the third round, you had two other Georgia linemen go. And once again, this is real interesting because both these guys were one-year starters at Georgia, and I think both of them were eligible to come back. And lots of people questioned their decision to go pro, particularly Dylan Fairchild, who up until this year had not played a lot. Jared Wilson had gotten to play some, but both of them went in the third round. Dylan Fairchild, number 81 overall to the Bengals. He was a guy I thought was probably going to be in the fourth round, but he went earlier. And then Jared Wilson, who many people have described as the most athletic center they've ever seen, went to the Patriots just in time with, David Andrews retiring for Jared Wilson to step in and keep that Georgia lineage going there at the center position for the Patriots.
Yeah, and a good time to go to the Patriots with Mike Vrabel taking over the head coaching duties. He's a good coach. And, Dylan Fairchild ended up on the Bengals. That's a great place to be with Joe Burrow and company over there. That they're going to be a contender. So he's got a chance to play some real meaningful football there.
Yeah, if they can get their defense figured out, I mean, obviously they have weapons like crazy on offense. got a lot of money tied up in their weapons on offense too. So it's good that they're going to have some cheap offensive linemen when you've got
Yeah.
when you got both receivers in the top 5 paid receivers.
As long as they don't
league.
lose the first half of their season, they got a good shot.
Yeah, they got to keep Burrow upright. No more true. Ankle injuries in training camp.
That's why they drafted Dylan.
Yep. So moving on in the 4th round. In the 4th round, we have the guy who was the most surprising, I thought, for where he went in the draft, and that's Arian Smith going number 110 to the Jets. I thought Arian Smith was like a 7th round guy. ESPN projected him as a 6th round guy. I was like, NFL teams are going to look at the drops, and I know the physical tools are there. That's why somebody would give him a shot. I thought he'd be a 7th round guy. To go in the 4th round, that means that not only are they expecting him to come in, they're expecting him to play next year. And maybe it was, his good performance at the Senior Bowl, because he was making some really good catches and had really good talk about him at the Senior Bowl. Or maybe it was just throughout this throw process he showed that maybe those drop issues, he's been working on them. But I was very, very surprised to see him go that high.
I think we all were. But when you look back at last season, yes, there were the drops, and that's what everybody's going to remember. But what people are not remembering is that he was Georgia's leading receiver. He had over 800 yards receiving. That's really good in Georgia standards. Georgia doesn't produce a lot of 1,000-yard.
We don't produce any of them.
That's what I'm saying. And he led the team in receptions and yards, and actually had a really good season. And when you look at the total number of drops that he had, I think it was still on par with some of the other, leading receivers in the country.
I think he led the country in drops. I'm pretty sure.
Possibly.
I think he did. It's not a stat that's easy to find. I tried to look up drops before. It's not a stat that's like easy to find unless you go into individual game logs. Like you're not going to find it on ESPN, but obviously everybody made a big deal about Georgia leading the country in drops, and I'm pretty sure he was at the top of the list.
All right, I found a good article here. All right, Arian Smith's number 1. He had 10 drops.
There you go.
Ryan Williams had 7 drops.
Yeah, Ryan Williams had a rough second half of the season. He for all the flash he had early in the year. That's why.
This is a top 10 list, and there's 3 Georgia receivers on it.
Wow. Drops were a problem.
Yeah. They're a problem, but it's still on par with other leading receivers. I'm not trying to be a Arian Smith apologist here. It was still annoying, and it cost us some games because it wasn't just that he had drops, but he had drops in like the biggest situations that could have been touchdowns or big first downs.
They always seem to be big plays that put us behind the sticks, and then we were struggling to run the ball. And so it led to a lot of times it seemed like he was dropping ball on first down, and kind of putting us behind the gun there anyway. So the other guy in the 4th round was Trevor Etienne. He went number 114 overall to the Panthers. Solid place for a running back. This day and age, unless you are insanely a freak, running backs aren't going to go that high. 4th round is a pretty solid position for Trevor Etienne. It sucked that his year at Georgia was really the first time in his career that he was injured, really, and he had that fumble late in the year. It was like his first ever fumble, but he was a solid player for Georgia. I really do wish he would have stuck around, but I don't know if he'd really been able to improve his draft stock that much.
Yeah, it would have been nice to have that depth and have a legit guy there, but he was ready.
Yeah.
So I can't really fault him. He had a decent year at Georgia, but he was hurt majority of the time, so we didn't really get the full benefit of his skill set. But I think he's going to fit in really well in NFL systems just because he's so elusive, can catch out of the backfield, and that's really what you need out of running backs nowadays, which is kind of funny.
His brother's obviously in the league, and they like family members in the NFL, so just good genes, I guess. But up next in the 5th round, so the first pick of the 5th round actually was Tyrion Ingram Dawkins. Another guy that people questioned whether he should have went pro. I predicted he would be somewhere in the 5th round, and that's where he went. He went to the Vikings. That's probably a good spot for him. He could have came back and improved his draft stock, but a 5th round is a good get for a guy that really overall didn't get to play a ton at Georgia, just because of the guys that we had ahead of him.
Yeah. Not much to say about him. I'm glad he was able to get drafted. 5th round, he'll be a depth guy. If he's got talent, he'll find a place in the NFL for sure. The Smile London though, going to the Eagles. I mean, obviously we know the Eagles are going to draft a Georgia player at some point during this draft. Great spot for him to land, back with his teammates, so they can help him along. But I was actually a little shocked that he dropped so far. I know he's coming off a lot of injuries last year and still trying to get back up to where he was at the year before, but he was always really, really solid and came through big in big games.
Yeah, I think that's what he was. Solid is the right word, but not spectacular, right? Kind of in the same vein that Jamon Dumas-Johnson was. Georgia clearly had some guys that are a little bit more physical than those guys were. Smile London was a 5-star prospect out of high school, and played a lot early. He obviously had some injuries, which held him back a little bit, but still a very solid player. To go 161 overall to the Eagles, I thought he would go somewhere late 4th round. So 5th round's a little bit later than that, but with him going to the Eagles, he's going to be the 7th Georgia player on the Eagles defense. That includes 6 guys, obviously, from the national championship years, plus they traded for Azeez Ojulari this offseason from the Giants. So 7 players and that counts that, that's counting on that Lewis Cine continues to get better and stays on the team. He's one that, might get cut, obviously. But I think everybody else, I don't think Keely Ringo is going to get cut. He's got a starting role in their special teams and plays a lot. And obviously all the rest of the guys are starters. So 7 players, 7 defensive players from Georgia on one team. That's why they continue to be the Philly Dogs.
Love it.
Yep. In the 6th round, we had Warren Brinson go 198 overall to the Packers. As I mentioned, the Packers are that team that, much like the Eagles, has a lot of Georgia players. This will be their 4th player from the 2021-2022 defenses on their team. Devontae Wyatt, Quay Walker, Javon Bullard. Eric Stokes, who was a 2020 grad, used to be on the Packers, but he signed with the Raiders this offseason. So if he would have still been there, then they would have had 5. But 6th round, that's right where I predicted he was going to go. Good spot for him. And then in the last round of the draft, we've got safety Dan Jackson, 230 overall to the Lions. I'm so happy for Dan Jackson. I thought he might actually go in the 6th round because I think him not going to the combine was dumb on the NFL part, and somebody was going to see his tape and hear about his effort and take him earlier. But I'm still uber excited that he went to the Detroit Lions at 230.
Yeah, me too. And how interesting is it that you have a guy who was a walk-on, worked his way up, worked his butt off, and was really, in my opinion, like the best player on Georgia's defense last year. And he gets drafted in the 7th round, 1 pick before Quinn Ewers, who was like the highest rated prospect in high school football history at the time, and gets drafted after a walk-on. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
It's just a great story. Very, very happy for Dan Jackson. Also happy for Dom Lovett. He went number 244 overall. This was a guy that I think a couple years ago, people thought he might be a 2nd, 3rd round type guy. But maybe that was overshadowed a little bit because of his time at Missouri when he was in a little bit more of a pass happy offense. He was a solid player for Georgia, and I'm glad he got drafted. I thought he might go a little bit higher in the 6th round. So that was it in terms of the guys that Georgia had drafted, there were 4 guys that were draft eligible that did not get drafted, though all 4 of them did ultimately sign free agent deals. Nazir Sackhouse signed with the Packers. Xavier Truss signed with the Broncos. Ben Urosic signed with the Vikings. And Chaz Chambliss also signed with the Vikings. So good for Chad. Another guy that I thought maybe should have been invited to the Combine but didn't get a chance to. So
Yeah, he should have. How surprised are you that Xavier Truss wasn't drafted?
Not at all. I feel like Xavier Truss is one of the worst like 3-4 year starters on the offensive line in the history of Georgia football. Like that guy, I know he played lots of positions for Georgia, filled in a lot for injuries. He started a lot of games, but man, did I always feel like he was the one getting burned or getting a holding or whatever. And he was there for so long. It doesn't surprise me. I wasn't a fan of his time at Georgia. But maybe he gets here, gets in an NFL camp. He's got size. Maybe he develops. So wish him luck in that regard.
Yeah, we wish him luck. I am super happy for Chaz Chambliss. I mean, he's one of the best guys to watch. I remember there was a video of him running someone down or getting ready to knock someone out, and he just had a big smile on his face. And they zoomed in on that, and it's like Chaz about to do something really vile here. He's just got this big smile. He's about to knock someone's block off. It was great. So yeah. I think he'll enjoy being around those Vikings fans. I think it's a perfect fit.
Yeah. Wrapping up some of the draft totals. Obviously, Ohio State led all teams with 14 players drafted. We mentioned one short of the Georgia record of 15. Georgia came in top team in the SEC, 13 players drafted. Texas, first year in the SEC, had 12 players drafted. Oregon, who spent most of the year at number 1, had 10 players drafted. Ole Miss, as we mentioned, mercenary team had 8 guys drafted. And then a group of teams that traditionally, always do well in the draft, Alabama, Florida, LSU, Miami, and Michigan all had 7 guys drafted. So if this says anything, the SEC once again dominated the draft. I think 79 total picks, new record. I think the old record was like 65. Big Ten had 71. So the Big Ten also broke the previous record. But it says a lot about the shifting dynamics of college football that, 150 players in this, however many it is, 240 some odd picks, were players from the SEC and the Big Ten. And I don't see that for changing in the future. Those conferences have the best players, and those are the ones that NFL teams are going to continue to go after to stock their rosters.
Yeah, and those 2 conferences, they're just going to continue to absorb more teams in conferences. We know where it's going. They have all the power in the planning of the future of college football anyway, like literally written in a contract that says that they do. So, these records that are getting broken are they're like speed limit signs. They're gonna get blown through multiple times as they keep adding more teams.
Yeah. So,
but it is weird. I think it is interesting and kind of shocking that Bama only 7 players. That is very un-Bama like.
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember. So the first year after Saban, they had some guys transfer out that probably would have been higher picks, shifting coaching staffs. I think some guys came back to Bama this year that might in the past have left. Bama didn't lose anybody in the spring transfer portal. Only team in the SEC to do that, which is pretty impressive. They had a lot of guys in the fall. I think they had 23 guys go into the transfer portal in the fall, but nobody in the spring. Georgia had 4 guys in the spring go into the transfer portal, but only like 13 in the fall. So overall, Georgia was still much less total players leaving. But I think it'll take a couple years for DeBoer, but it wouldn't surprise me. I was looking at some stuff from next year. I think there's projected 3 or 4 picks in the first round next year. So the Bama talent ain't going anywhere. It's still there. This may have been a cyclical year where they just didn't have as many as they had.
I mean, I'm just trying to be optimistic and hope that it's a trend.
Yeah, we'll see. But the biggest story of this draft for the entire country was the saga of Shedeur Sanders.
Oh no.
It ruled the
Poor,
draft.
poor
I mean,
Shador.
poor Shedeur, a guy that Mel Kiper said was arguably the best player in the draft and should have been drafted in the first round, falls to the 5th round, and goes to Cleveland, even though Cleveland took Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd round, and they have 3 other quarterbacks already on their roster. So, obviously this got the media attention. And I think at the end of the day, I think this is a situation where a player's attitude and some of their decisions around their representation really hurt them. There was some discussion, the whole prank call situation, that might have happened partly because Shedeur Sanders is one of the few players that didn't have an agent. And normally players, listen. So this came out today. So normally the players' phone numbers that are given to the NFL teams are the agent's numbers. So all the calls go to the agent who facilitates the call with the NFL team. But because Shedeur Sanders did not have an agent, it was his number that appeared on the list of contact information that was given out to the NFL. And that's ultimately what was leaked to, the son of the Falcons defensive coordinator, the one that was part of this whole deal. So the league has to do a better job of protecting it. But if it wouldn't have been just Shedeur Sanders representing himself, it might have been an agent. So
I think that whole story is overblown, because Cooper DeJean got prank called last year.
Oh, Tyler Warren got prank called this year. It wasn't just him.
I mean, come on.
Right. But it was but it was part of the drama of him falling, and he fell to day 3. I mean, that, a guy that was up there in the marquee that everybody thought was going to go high, going all the way to 3rd day, says a lot about what teams thought of him. That teams had criticism of his interviews and the way that Deion treated things. And initially in the early draft process, Deion said they're going to dictate what team he goes to. And, I think in all this situation and what we've seen over the last month with the Nico situation, I love this quote that I saw on Sunday from Colin Cowherd. He said, "Quarterback dad has become the new pageant mom." I couldn't agree with that more.
That's a great quote.
The quarterback dad meddles so much and is so worried about his kid and thinks because they are a star that they can dictate everybody else around them. And, unfortunately, it hurts a kid because I think Shedeur Sanders is a good kid. I don't think he's a bad guy. He's from a rich background. He's got a rich family, and his dad is prime time. But
yeah,
he may have lost a lot of money because now he's in a situation where he's a 5th round draft pick.
Yeah, I think it's a few things. I think for one, being the son of Deion Sanders is something to take caution on when you're drafting a player, because that's going to bring attention and potentially distraction into your locker room. And NFL locker rooms, the last thing they want is any type of distraction whatsoever. Right. So that's the first knock on it. The second is, if you just watch some of these videos of him and Cam Ward working out together, you just see a stark difference of a guy who is there to play football and loves the game. And that's what coaches always talk about. They want, especially Kirby Smart, he preaches this. He wants guys that are motivated, love football. Actually, he says, love football first. That's always the first thing that comes out of his mouth. And you just didn't get that vibe with Shedeur. It was more like, I'm just really good at football, but I want to do all these other things, whatever. And then you look at Cam Ward and he's like, I want to be known as a football player. What do you do for fun? I play football. Do you want to make a video? No, I want to play football. And so I think that really stands out. And, that's something that coaches are going to look at and say, well, he's not really, doesn't seem that committed to it. And then, people start making a big deal about, oh, well, he had 4,000 passing yards and was, Big 12 offensive player of the year. But who else had similar numbers? Gardner Minshew.
Right. Yeah,
Government
there was a big video that said, when was the last time that a guy fell to the 5th round when they had 4,000 yards passing and won the Johnny Unitas Award?
Yeah.
And the answer was Gardner Minshew won the Johnny Unitas Award and had 4,000 yards passing, and was a 5th round draft pick. So
yeah. So all this stuff about it being like a race thing, it's all bullcrap. It just is. People don't. When you factor in those three things, it just comes down to the fact that these teams didn't even have them on their board.
And it's weird because they spent 3 days of NFL draft coverage talking about a player who ended up being a 5th round draft pick. And honestly, this was the least I've ever seen in NFL draft coverage talk about the number 1 overall pick. Cam Ward did everything right leading up to this. He impressed people, and his story is really good too. Like, he was a guy that was not recruited out of high school. He was essentially a 0-star prospect.
He was a 0-star prospect
who went to Incarnate Word and then transferred to Washington State and eventually to Miami and built his resume over years. He wasn't handed a starting job and, did everything right. It says a little bit about a guy going to a situation. He's going to play for the Titans. And when they had the introduction press conference, Cam Ward wore number 1 in college. Number 1 is retired by the Titans franchise by Warren Moon. Warren Moon showed up at the press conference and gave him the jersey and said, "I want you to wear this number." To me, that's very impressive.
That's super impressive. I mean, what a freaking honor there. I mean, and I get it. It makes a lot of sense, and that's just great to see.
Right. So obviously there were other stories in this draft too. One of the big ones was obviously Travis Hunter. The Jaguars traded up to get Travis Hunter at 2nd. And with the Jaguars drafting Travis Hunter, all I got to say is Travis Hunter's all elite. But it's interesting. It's interesting that ended up happening because it's interesting though, because Cleveland, they could have taken Hunter at 2, kept their pick, and then gotten Shedeur. And that would have been the ideal scenario, I think, for Shedeur, was going with Hunter. Jacksonville wanted to make it happen, so it did, but still kind of weird.
How funny is it that Dion tweeted at one point that if Shedeur went to Cleveland Browns, he'd pull a Eli?
Like I said,
and then he ends up going to Cleveland.
Another problem.
It's like a opening to Always Sunny in Philadelphia. My son's not going to go play for Cleveland. Shedeur goes and plays for Cleveland.
So another interesting thing out of this draft related to Cleveland was that if you saw what Cleveland did in the draft, I think it means that Nick Chubb's time in Cleveland is probably going to be at an end. It's interesting because Nick Chubb was posting videos today of him deadlifting 405, which is insane for a guy with coming off a broken foot and the knee injury he had. But Cleveland drafted 2 of the top running backs in the draft. They drafted Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State. And then a couple rounds later, they took Dylan Sampson from Tennessee. Dylan Sampson led the SEC in rushing last year. Quinshon Judkins was 2nd in the SEC in 2023 when he was at Ole Miss. So they have restocked their backfield with 2 horses who have both played in the SEC. And then, Judkins also played at Ohio State. So this probably means that Nick Chubb is on the way out of town. They had released him, but I think he wanted to re-sign there. And I thought he might end up back there, but it looks like he's probably moving on.
I'm happy he's moving on from Cleveland. I hope he gets to go to a contender and play in some actual meaningful football games.
Yeah. I mean, after the second devastating knee injury of his career, he started out slow last year, but by, one of his last games, he was finally getting going, and then he broke his foot. And, for a guy that we watched in college when he tore up his knee at Tennessee, it was so heartbreaking. And that dude is just such a good dude and such just the most heads down, hard work, polite dude you'll ever see on the football field. I hope he finds a new home, and I hope his career continues. And, he's getting towards the end because he's a running back and he's getting near 30, but I hope he finds, one more spot where he can have a couple more good years and end on a high note.
Yeah, I do too. We always pull for our Dawgs. He's definitely a DGD for sure.
Yep. Another story, obviously, we touched on it a little bit before, but Quinn Ewers fell to the 7th round of the draft. As you mentioned, this was a guy coming out of high school who was considered the top-rated prospect ever in 24/7 history. What happened, man?
Well, he turned down millions of dollars to stay in college to make hundreds of thousands of dollars in the NFL.
Yeah, he did. But you know what? You know what he said? He said that it was always his dream to play in the NFL. And if you looked at the video of where he was during the draft with all the crazy hunting trophies on the wall, I don't think money is a problem for his family.
No. And he probably definitely made some millions in the past couple of years anyway. So, yeah. I mean, once you get a couple million, you're pretty much set if you're not an idiot,
Right.
So being able to, make 900,000, I mean, we're saying, 900,000 is not that much. I would love to get $900,000 a year to play a game. That would be fantastic.
Right. It was interesting because with him being drafted in the 7th round, Donovan Edwards of Michigan wasn't even drafted. And then Travis Hunter went second. So the 3 guys on the college football game, one of them went second, one went 7th, and one wasn't even drafted. So I think next year they're rocking with Jeremiah Smith, Ryan Williams, and Caleb Downs. I think they'll have probably a little bit better outcome with those guys than they did their first year.
We'll see. Is this the new Madden curse?
I don't know. Here's another funny, I say funny, not really funny, but interesting thing about Ewers getting drafted in the 7th round. Do you know who was drafted in a round ahead of Ewers? Florida quarterback Graham Mertz.
That's wild.
Graham Mertz wasn't even a 7th round pick. I think he was either a 5th or a 6th round pick. It's a guy who missed almost all year last year.
Who did he go to?
Texans.
So they basically drafted a backup.
So he went in the 6th round at 197 overall to the Houston Texans.
So he's basically drafted as a backup. I mean, that's a weird pick. Because draft picks are very valuable, even if it's the 6th or 7th round. It seems like this is a guy. I mean, you could have got.
He had a good year. He had a good year. Yeah, he had a good year at Florida in 2023, especially down the stretch, kind of stabilizing things. But last year he got hurt and didn't play much, and I don't remember him being like a crazy physical specimen or anything. So that just seems like a stretch. And just to think that a guy with his resume versus Quinn Ewers, who led Texas to the playoffs twice and won a Big 12 championship and had that great game against Alabama that they almost won, a couple years ago when Alabama, was really good. Like, it's just weird. Sometimes I don't understand the NFL draft, and that might be one.
Maybe they, whoever made the draft pick had their auto draft set and accidentally had him out of order.
So another draft pick that you should keep an eye out on that was late in the draft was Will Howard of Ohio State. Obviously, Will Howard is a physical guy who has the good physical characteristics of an NFL quarterback, strong arm, had a really solid season, especially in the playoffs. He played great. I know we were a little hard on him earlier in the year last year, but down in the playoffs, he was great. He goes to the Steelers. The Steelers are a team that you kind of scratch your head. Why didn't they draft Shedeur Sanders? Because they have Mason,
Will Howard.
they have Mason Rudolph and Skylar Thompson. That's it. That's their quarterback room. And this is a Steelers team that makes the playoffs every year. That's the one thing under Tomlin they do. They make the playoffs every year. And so he's had a chance to come in there and potentially earn a starting job, not right off, but
he's got a real shot to win that job. I mean, Mason Rudolph's been there before, but he's nothing special.
He's been, he's only played when he had to.
And I don't trust anybody named Skylar.
Right. Yeah. Skylar Thompson. Yeah. So that's a situation that I think will be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a steal, no pun intended.
Yeah,
because Will Howard, he's a big dude. He can run. He's got a great arm. I remember seeing him on one of the Gruden interviews, and Gruden was like saying all the exact same things, and he's like, you know who that is? Josh Allen.
right,
Now,
right.
I'm
Yeah,
not saying he's Josh Allen, but measurables are there.
and he's a winner.
He's a winner. He won a national championship. Can't
Yep,
take anything away from that. And when he was in the Big 12 at Kansas State, he was really, really good.
he was. Last pick I want to touch on is one of our favorites here. Ashton Jeanty goes number 6 overall to the Raiders. Anytime you have a running back this day and age going in the first round, let alone in the top 10, people think he's the real deal. And this is a dude. We sang his praises last year. I think he goes into a fun situation. Pete Carroll coming in to take over that Raiders offense. He brought in Geno Smith, who was his quarterback in Seattle a few years ago. They've got Brock Bowers, obviously. The receiving core looks like crap because I think they got rid of Devontae Adams, and I don't really know what they have at receiver, but it'll be fun to watch Jeanty run the ball and Brock Bowers catch the ball for the Raiders.
Absolutely. It's good to see the Raiders have a legit running back again. It reminds me of the old Tecmo Bowl Bo Jackson days.
Yeah. My only regret there is that who's our running back from Georgia that is on the Raiders? My brain is gone. Zeus. Yeah. It's a shame. He didn't get to live his full potential. He was going to get the starting role last year and he got hurt and just never really lived up to it. So Jeanty will be taking that over, but he can back him up.
Absolutely. You got to have depth at the running back position because people are going to get hurt. It's just the way of the world.
So that kind of wraps it up for the NFL draft. Obviously, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to dive back into college football. There's a lot going on. There's still discussion about the Supreme Court settlement, the player rosters. There's obviously some legal battles going on now with players signing bonuses after they've transferred and other things. But as we close up the draft, Burl, any final thoughts on the draft?
Just a great weekend for Georgia and the SEC and Big Ten. Congrats to Kirby for putting together great squads and developing and building talent and giving people the opportunity to make NFL rosters and get drafted very highly. So just a great weekend for Georgia. Good. What else can I say?
Yep. All right. Well, that'll wrap us up for tonight. Once again, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to this podcast. We really, really appreciate you watching and listening. And we'll talk to you again next week. Until next week, I'm Street.
I'm Burl.
Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.